working him through his still damp clothes that finally tricked through his exhaustion as well. Deep in a dream of Emmons Field, of working at Master Luhan's forge, he opened his eyes and stared, uncomprehendingly, at the sweet-smelling branches interwoven over his face, sunlight trickling through. Most of the branches fell away as he sat up in surprise, but some hung haphazardly from his shoulders, and even his head, making him appear something like a tree himself. Emmons Field faded as memory rushed back, so vivid that for a moment the night before seemed more real than anything around him now. Panting, frantic, he scrabbled his axe out of the pile. He clutched it in both hands and peered around cautiously, holding his breath. Nothing moved. The morning was cold and still. If there were Trollocs on the east bank of the Arenelle, they were not moving, or at least not close to him. Taking a deep, calming breath, he lowered the axe to his knees and waited a moment for his heart to stop pounding. The small stand of evergreens surrounding him was the first shelter he had found last night. It was sparse enough to give little protection against watching eyes if he stood up. Plucking branches from his head and shoulders, he pushed aside the rest of his prickly blanket, then crawled on hands and knees to the edge of the copse. There he lay, studying the riverbank and scratching where the needles had stabbed him. The cutting wind of the night before had faded to a silent breeze that barely rippled the surface of the water. The river ran by, calm and empty, and wide. Surely too wide and too deep for Fades to cross. The far bank appeared a solid mass of trees as far as he could see upriver and down. Certainly nothing moved in his view over there. He was not sure how he felt about that. Fades and Trollocs he could do without quite easily, even on the other side of the river. But a whole list of worries would have vanished with the appearance of the Aes Sedai, or the water, or even better, any of his friends. If wishes were wings, sheep would fly. That was what Mistress Luhan always said. He had not seen a sign of his horse since riding over the bluff. He hoped it had swum out of the river safely, but he was more used to walking than riding anyway, and his boots were stout and well soled. He had nothing to eat, but his sling was still wrapped around his waist, and that, or the snare lines in his pocket, ought to yield a rabbit in a little time. Everything for making a fire was gone with his saddlebags, but the cedar trees would yield tinder and a fire bow with a bit of work. He shivered as the breeze gusted into his hiding place. His cloak was somewhere in the river, and his coat and everything else he wore were still clammy cold from the soaking in the river. He had been too tired for the cold and damp to bother him last night, but now he was wide awake to every chill. Just the same, he decided against hanging his clothes on the branches to dry. If the day was not precisely cold, it was not even close to warm. Time was the problem, he thought with a sigh. Dry clothes with a little time, a rabbit to roast and a fire to roast it over with a little time. His stomach rumbled, and he tried to forget about eating altogether. There were more important uses for that time. One thing at a time, and the most important first. That was his way. His eyes followed the strong flow of the Arenelle downriver. He was a stronger swimmer than Egwene. If she had made it across, no, not if. The place where she had made it across would be downriver. He drummed on the ground with his fingers, weighing, considering. His decision made, he wasted no time in picking up his axe and setting off downriver. This side of the Arenelle lacked the thick forest to the west bank. Clumps of trees spotted across what would be grassland if spring ever came. Some were big enough to be called thickets, with swaths of evergreens among the barren ash and alder and hardgum. Down by the river, the stands were smaller and not so tight. They gave poor cover, but they were all the cover there was. He dashed from growth to growth in a crouch, throwing himself down when he was among the trees to study the riverbanks, the far side as well as his. The warder said the river would be a barrier to Fades and Trollocs, but would it? Seeing him might be enough to overcome their reluctance to cross deep water. So he watched carefully from behind the trees and ran from one hiding place to the next, fast and low. He covered several miles that way, in spurts, until suddenly, halfway to the beckoning shelter of a growth of willows, he grunted and stopped dead, staring at the ground. Patches of bare earth spotted the matted brown of last year's grass, and in the middle of one of those patches, right under his nose, was a clear hoof print. A slow smile spread across his face. Some Trollocs had hooves, but he doubted if any wore horseshoes, especially horseshoes with the double crossbar Master Luhan added for strength. Forgetting possible lives on the other side of the river, he cast about for more tracks. The plaited carpet of dead grass did not take impressions well, but his sharp eyes found them anyway. The scanty trail led him straight away from the river to a dense stand of trees, thick with leather leaf and cedar, that made a wall against wind or prying eyes. The spreading branches of a lone hemlock towered in the middle of it all. Still grinning, he pushed his way through the interwoven branches, not caring how much noise he made. Abruptly, he stepped into a little clearing under the hemlock and stopped. Behind a small fire, Egwene crouched, her face grim, with a thick branch held like a club and her back against Bella's flank. "I guess I should have called out," he said with an abashed shrug. Tossing her club down, she ran to throw her arms around him. "I thought you were drowned. You're still wet. Here, sit by the fire and warm yourself. You lost your horse, didn't you?" He let her push him to a place by the fire and rubbed his hands over the flames, grateful for the warmth. She produced an oiled paper packet from her saddlebags and gave him some bread and cheese. The package had been so tightly wrapped that even after its dunking, the food was dry. "Here you were worrying about her, and she's done better than you did." "Bella got me across," Egwene said, patting the shaggy mare. "She headed away from the Trollocs and just towed me along."
Hey, Rain Bear, how you doing? Happy New Year, bro.
He heard the
I hope you're
unspoken
doing
question.
safe out there.
Regretfully eyeing the packet that she was rewrapping, he licked the last crumbs from his fingers before speaking. "I've seen no one but you since last night. No Fades or Trollocs either. There's that." "Brand has to be all right," Egwene said, quickly adding, "They all do. They have to. They're probably looking for us right now.
Yeah, Happy
They
New
might
Year
find
to you,
us any
too.
time now. Moraine is an Aes Sedai, after all." "I keep being reminded of that," he said. "Burn me, I wish I could forget." "I did not hear you complaining when she stopped the Trollocs from catching us," Egwene said tartly. "I just wish we could do without her." He shrugged uncomfortably under her steady gaze. "I suppose we can't, though. I've been thinking." Her eyebrows rose, but he was used to surprise whenever he claimed an idea. Even when his ideas were as good as theirs, they always remembered how deliberate he was in thinking of them. "We can wait for Lana Moraine to find us." "Of course she can. I said she would find us if we were separated." He let her finish, then went on. "Or the Trollocs could find us first. Moraine could be dead. All of them could be." "No, Egwene. I'm sorry, but they could be. I hope they are all safe. I hope they'll walk up to this fire any minute. But hope is like a piece of string when you're drowning. It just isn't enough to get you out by itself." Egwene closed her mouth and stared at him with her jaw set.
Dean wanted to slow down.
"You want to go downriver to Whitebridge? If Moraine Sedai doesn't find us here, that's where she will look next." "I suppose," he said slowly, "that Whitebridge is where we should go. But the Fades probably know that too. That's where they'll be looking. And this time we don't have an Aes Sedai or a warder to protect us. I suppose you're going to suggest running off somewhere, the way Matt wanted to? Hiding somewhere the Fades and Trollocs won't find us? Or Moraine Sedai either?" "Don't think I haven't considered it," he said quietly. "But every
Calling
time
out more
we're
fire.
free, Fades and
It's
Trollocs
not too
find us
chilly
again.
here.
I don't know if there is any place
I
we
actually
can
got
hide. I don't like
my
it much.
window unit on low right now.
Moraine. Where do we go?" He blinked in surprise. She was waiting for his answer, waiting for him to tell her what to do.
Excuse me.
It had never occurred to him that she would look to him to take the lead. Egwene never liked doing what someone else had planned out, and she never let anybody tell her what to do, except maybe the wisdom, and he thought sometimes she balked at that. He smoothed the dirt in front of him with his hand.
I hope you're staying warm out there, Raining Bear.
If this is where we are now, and that is Whitebridge, he stabbed the ground twice with his finger, then Camelin should be somewhere around here. He made a third mark, off to the side. He paused, looking at the 3 dots in the dirt. His entire plan was based on what he remembered of her father's old map. Master Aldir said it was not too accurate, and anyway, he had never mooned over it as much as Rand and Matt. But Egwene said nothing. When he looked up, she was still watching him with her hands in her lap.
Oh, shit. Heat grill to warm cabin.
She sounded stunned.
Yeah, that's what you gotta do. What you gotta do to stay
They drew a
warm.
line in the dirt between 2 of the dots. Away from the river and straight across. Nobody would expect that. We'll wait for them in Camelin. He dusted his hands and waited. He thought it was a good plan, but surely she would have objections now. He expected she would take charge. She was always bullying him into something, and that was all right with him. To his surprise, she nodded. There must be villages. We can ask directions. What worries me, Perrin said, is what we do if the Aes Sedai doesn't find us there. Right. Who'd ever have thought I'd worry about something like that? What if she doesn't come to Camelin? Maybe she thinks we're dead. Maybe she'll take Rand and Matt straight to Tar Valon. Moiraine Sedai said she could find us, Egwene said firmly. If she can find us here, she can find us in Camelin. And she will. Perrin nodded slowly. If you say so. But if she doesn't appear in Camelin in a few days, we go on to Tar Valon and put our case before the Amarlin seat. He took a deep breath. 2 weeks ago, you'd never even seen an Aes Sedai.
Yeah,
Now
shit,
you're
65
talking about
inside.
the Amarlin seat. Right. According to Lan, there's a good road from Camelin. He looked at the old paper packet beside Egwene and cleared his throat. What chance of a little more bread and cheese? This might have to last a long time, she said. Unless you have better luck with snares than I did last night. At least the fire was easy. She laughed softly as if she had made a joke, tucking the packet back into her saddlebags. Apparently there were limits to how much leadership she was willing to accept. His stomach rumbled. In that case, he said, standing, you might as well start now. But you're still wet, she protested. I'll walk myself dry, he said firmly, and began kicking dirt over the fire. He was the leader. It was time to start leading. The wind from the river was picking up. Chapter 23. Wolf Brother. From the start, Perrin knew the journey to Camelin was going to be far from comfortable, beginning with Egwene's insistence that they take turns riding Bella. They did not know how far it was, she said, but it was too far for her to be the only one who rode. Her jaw firmed and her eyes stared at him unblinking. I'm too big to ride Bella, he said. I'm used to walking and I'd rather. And I'm not used to walking? Egwene said sharply. That isn't what I'm the only one who's supposed to get saddle sore, is that it? And when you walk till your feet are ready to fall off, you expect me to look after you. Let it be, he breathed when she looked like going on. Anyway, you'll take the first turn. Her face turned even more stubborn, but he refused to let her get a word in edgewise. If you won't get in the saddle by yourself, I'll put you there. She gave him a startled look, and a small smile curved her lips. In that case... She sounded as if she were about to laugh, but she climbed up. He grumbled to himself as he turned away from the river. Leaders in stories never had to put up with this sort of thing. Egwene did insist on him taking his turns, and whenever he tried to avoid it, she bullied him into the saddle. Blacksmithing did not lend itself to a slender build, and Bella was not very large as horses went. Every time he put his foot in the stirrup, the shaggy mare looked at him with what he was sure was reproach. Small things, perhaps, but they irritated. Soon he flinched whenever Egwene announced, "It's your turn, Perrin." In stories, leaders seldom flinched, and they were never bullied. But, he reflected, They never had to deal with Egwene either.
No shit.
There were only short rations of bread and cheese to begin with.
Had to
What
clear
there
it.
was gave out by the end of the first day. Aaron set snares along likely rabbit runs.
Attachment, that wire.
Chance. While Egwene began laying a fire. When he was done, he decided to try his hand with his sling before the light failed altogether. They had not seen a sign of anything at all alive, but, to his surprise, he jumped a scrawny rabbit almost at once. He was so surprised when it burst from under a bush right beneath his feet that it almost got away. But he fetched it at 40 paces, just as it was darting around a tree. When he came back to the camp with the rabbit, Egwene had broken limbs all laid for the fire, but she was kneeling beside the pile with her eyes closed. "What are you doing? You can't wish a fire." Egwene gave a jump at his first words and twisted around to stare at him with a hand to her throat. You startled me." "I was lucky," he said, holding up the rabbit. "Get your flint and steel. You eat well tonight, at least." "I don't have a flint," she said slowly. "It was in my pocket, and I lost it in the river." "Then how?" "It was so easy back there on the riverbank, Perrin. Just the way Moraine said I showed me. I just reached out and..." She gestured as if grasping for something, and let her hand fall with a sigh. "I can't find it now." Perrin licked his lips uneasily. The power?" She nodded, and he stared at her. "Are you crazy? I mean, the one power? You can't just play around with something like that." "It was so easy, Perrin. I can do it. I can channel the power." He took a deep breath. "I'll make a fireball, Egwene. Promise you won't try this thing again." "I will not." Her jaw firmed in a way that made him sigh. "Would you give up that axe of yours, Perrin Aybara? Would you walk around with one hand tied behind your back? I won't do it." "I'll make the fireball," he said wearily. "At least don't try it again tonight. Please?" She acquiesced grudgingly, and even after the rabbit was roasting on a spit over the flames, he had the feeling she felt she could have done it better. She would not give up trying either, every night, though the best she ever did was a trickle of smoke that vanished almost immediately. Her eyes did he wisely kept his mouth shut. They subsisted on wild tubers and a few young shoots. With still no sign of spring, none of it was
That one hurt a little bit.
None of it was tasty either. Neither complained, but not a meal passed without one or the other sighing regretfully, and they both knew it was for the tang of a bit of cheese, or even the smell of bread. A find of mushrooms, queen's crowns at best, one afternoon in a shady part of the forest was enough to seem a great treat. They gobbled them down, laughing and telling stories from back at Emmons Field. Stories that began, "Do you remember when?" But the mushrooms did not last long, and neither did the laughter. There was little mirth and hunger. Whichever was walking carried a sling ready to let fly at the sight of a rabbit or squirrel, but the only time either hurled a stone was
Rabbit stew. Hell yeah.
The snares they set so carefully.
Yeah, rabbit stew's always good. What's better is
stay a day in one place to leave the snares out.
Goat stew.
Neither of them knew how far it was to Camelin, and neither would feel safe until they got there, if then. Perrin began to wonder if his stomach could shrink enough to make a hole all the way through his middle. They made good time, as he saw it, but as they got farther and farther from the Arenelle without seeing a village or even a farmhouse where they could ask directions, his doubts about his own plan grew. Egwene continued to appear outwardly as confident as when they set out, but he was sure that sooner or later she would say it would have been better to risk the Trollocs than to wander around lost for the rest of their lives. She never did, but he kept expecting it. 2 days from the river, the land changed to thickly forested hills, as gripped by the tail end of winter as everywhere else, and a day after that the hills flattened out again, the dense forest broken by glades, often a mile or more across. Snow still lay in hidden hollows, and the air was brisk of a morning, and the wind cold always. Nowhere did they see a road, or a plowed field,
I
or
had to
chimney
say the
smoke in the
goat stew's
distance,
better.
or any other sign of human habitation. At
But
least,
when
no more men
my
stirred
brother
from it.
cooked it, he actually cooked it in
Once
a
the
stew,
remains
let
of
it
tall
slow
stone
cook all night.
ramparts encircled the hilltop.
But we pretty much got
Parts
it
of roofless stone houses
fresh.
stood inside the fallen circle. The forest had
Straight,
long
it
swallowed.
barely got done
Trees
getting
grew right through everything, and spider
butchered,
riders
and
of old creeper
we
and
got
the
pretty
big
much
stone blocks.
half a
Another
goat
time
split
they came
down
on a
the
stone
down
tower,
the spine.
broken topped and brown with old moss, leaning on the huge oak whose thick roots were slowly toppling it. But they found no place where men had breathed in living remembrance. Memories of Shadar Logoth kept them away from the ruins and hurried their footsteps until they were once more deep in places that seemed never to have known a human footstep. Dreams plagued Perrin's sleep, fearful dreams. Baal-Zaman was in them, chasing him through mazes, hunting him, but Perrin never met him face to face, so far as he remembered. And their journey had been enough to bring a few bad dreams. Egwene complained of nightmares about Shadar Logoth, especially the 2 nights after they found the ruined fort and the abandoned tower. Perrin kept his own counsel, even when he woke sweating and shaking in the dark. She was looking to him to lead them safely to Caemlyn, not share worries about which they could do nothing.
Give me 1 second, everyone. I'll
He
be
was walking
right
at
back.
Bella's head, wondering if they would find anything to eat this evening, when he first caught the smell. The mare flared her nostrils and swung her head in the next moment. He seized her bridle before she could whip her. "That's smoke," Egwene said excitedly. She leaned forward in the saddle, drew a deep breath. "A cook fire! Somebody is roasting dinner. Rabbit." "Maybe," Perrin said cautiously, and her eager smile faded. He exchanged his sling for the wicked half-moon of the axe. His hands opened and closed uncertainly like a thick haft. It was a weapon, but neither his hidden practice behind the forge nor Land's teaching had really prepared him to use it as one. Even the battle before Shadar Logoth was too vague in his mind to give him any confidence. He could never quite manage that void that Rand in the Water talked about either. Sunlight slanted through the trees behind them, and the forest was a steep mass of dappled shadows. The faint smell of wood smoke drifted around them, tinged with the aroma of cooking meat. It could be rabbit, he thought, and his stomach grumbled. And it could be something else, he reminded himself. He looked at Egwene. She was watching him. There were responsibilities to being leader. "Wait here," he said softly. She frowned, but he cut her off as she opened her mouth. "And be quiet. We don't know who it is yet." She nodded. Reluctantly, but she did it. Perrin wondered why that did not work when he was trying to make her take his turn riding. Drawing a deep breath, he started for the source of the smoke. He had not spent as much time in the forests around Emond's Field as Rand or Mat, but still he had done his share of hunting rabbits. He crept from tree to tree without so much as snapping a twig. It was not long before he was peering around the bole of a tall oak with spreading serpentine limbs that bent to touch the ground, then rose again. Beyond lay a campfire, and a lean, sun-browned man was leaning against one of the limbs not far from the flames. At least he was not a Trolloc, but he was the strangest fellow Perrin had ever seen. For one thing, his clothes all seemed to be made from animal skins, with the fur still on. Even his boots and the odd, flat-topped round cap on his head. His cloak was a crazy quilt of rabbit and squirrel. His trousers appeared to be made from the long-haired hide of a brown and white goat. Gathered at the back of his neck with a cord, his gray-brown hair hung to his waist. A thick beard fanned across half his chest. A long knife hung at his belt, almost a sword, and a bow and quiver stood propped against a limb close to hand. The man leaned back with his eyes closed, apparently asleep, but Perrin did not stir from his concealment.
Hey, MJ, how you doing?
6 sticks slanted over the fellow's
Happy New Year to you too,
on
bro.
each stick, a rabbit was skewered, roasted brown, and now and then dripping juice that hissed in the flames. The smell of them, so close, made his mouth water. "You're done drooling." The man opened one eye and cocked it at Perrin's hiding place. You and your friend might as well sit and have a bite. I haven't seen you eat much the last couple of days. Perrin hesitated, then stood slowly, still gripping his axe tightly. You've been watching me for 2 days? The man chuckled deep in his throat. Yes, I've been watching you. And that pretty girl pushes you around like a bantam rooster, doesn't she? Heard you mostly. The horse is the only one of you doesn't trample around loud enough to be heard 5 miles off.
Nice, MJ.
You going to ask her in? Or are you intending to eat all the rabbit yourself? Perrin bristled. He knew he did not make much noise. You could not get close enough to a rabbit in the waterwood to fetch it with a sling if he made noise. But the smell of rabbit made him remember that Egwene was hungry too. Not to mention waiting to discover if it was a trolloc fire they had.
Hell yeah.
He slipped the hand of his axe through the belt loop.
I think many of my brothers actually tried some of those nerd ropes before.
It's all right.
They weren't too bad.
Offering his hand, he added in a more normal tone. My name is Perrin. Perrin Ibarra. The man considered his hand before taking it awkwardly, as if unused to shaking hands. I'm called Elias, he said, looking up. Elias Machira. Perrin gasped and nearly dropped Elias's hand. The man's eyes were yellow, like bright polished gold. Some memory tickled at the back of Perrin's mind.
Me and my brother used to get that syrup. The syrup that you can add to your drinks.
Egwene appeared, cautiously leading Bella. She tied the mare's reins to one of the smaller branches of the yoke and made polite sounds when Perrin introduced her to Elias. But her eyes kept drifting to the rabbits. She did not seem to notice the man's eyes. When Elias motioned them to the food, she fell to with a will. Perrin hesitated only a minute longer before joining her. Elias waited silently while they ate. Perrin was so hungry he tore off pieces of meat so hot he had to juggle them from hand to hand before he could.
Yeah, this one's it's like coming to cough syrup bottles, like a syrup.
Greasy juice ran down.
Like it's pretty much like cough syrup, but you can add it to your whatever your drink is. Like you can add it to your Sprite. You can add it to whatever your favorite drink is. And it comes from
what are you doing out here? There isn't a house.
I think 150 milligrams to you can find 500 milligram syrups.
Perhaps you could. Her eyes lifted coolly as Elias threw back his head and roared with laughter. Perrin stared at him, a rabbit leg half raised to his mouth. Jim!
And they have different flavors too. You can get like cherry.
The path you were following.
Excuse me.
Taken the last 2 days.
Grape,
You'll pass 100
strawberry,
miles
pineapple.
We were going to ask directions, Egwene said defensively. We just haven't found any villages or farms yet. And none you will, Elias said, chuckling. The way you're going, you can travel all the way to the spine of the world without seeing another human. Of course, if you manage to climb the spine, it can be done some places. You could find people in the Aiel Waste, but you wouldn't like it there. You'd boil by day and freeze by night and die of thirst any time. It takes an Aielman to find water in the waste. And they don't like strangers much. No, not much, I'd say. He set off into another, more furious burst of laughter, this time actually rolling on the ground. Not much at all, he managed.
Damn.
Perrin shifted.
I wish our dabs were that cheap here.
Egwene frowned, but she waited until Elias's mirth faded a little, then said, Perhaps you could show us the way. You seem to know a good deal more about where places are than we do. Elias stopped laughing.
We used to have grams of dab anyways.
Raised his brown fur cap, which had fallen off while he was rolling about, and stared at her from under lowered brows. I don't much like people, he said in a flat voice.
1 second, I'll be right back.
Cities are full of people. I don't go near villages or even farms very often. Villagers
I can get up without dropping shit.
They don't like my friends. I wouldn't even have helped you if you hadn't been stumbling around as helpless and innocent as newborn cubs. But at least you can tell us which way to go, she insisted. If you direct us to the nearest village, even if it's 50 miles away, surely they'll give us directions to Camelin. Be still, Elias said. My friends are coming. Bella suddenly whinnied in fear and began jerking to pull her reins free. Baron half rose as shapes appeared all around them in the darkening forest. Bella reared and twisted, screaming. Quiet the mare, Elias said. They won't hurt her. Or you, if you're still. 4 wolves stepped into the firelight, shaggy, waist-high forms, with jaws that could break a man's leg. As if the people were not there, they walked up to the fire and lay down between the humans. In the darkness among the trees, firelight reflected off the eyes of more wolves on all sides. Yellow eyes, Baron thought, like Elias's. That was what he had been trying to remember. Carefully watching the wolves among them, he reached for his axe. I would not do that, Elias said. If they think you mean harm, they'll stop being friendly. They were staring at him, those 4 wolves, Baron saw. He had the feeling that all the wolves, those in the trees as well, were staring at him. It made his skin itch. Cautiously, he moved his hands away from the axe. He imagined he could feel the tension ease among the wolves. Slowly, he sat back down. His hands shook until he gripped his knees to stop them. Egwene was so stiff she almost quivered. One wolf, close to black with a lighter gray patch on his face, lay nearly touching her. Bella had ceased her screaming and rearing. Instead, she stood trembling and shifting in an attempt to keep all of the wolves in view, kicking occasionally to show the wolves that she could, intending to sell her life dearly. The wolves seemed to ignore her and everyone else. Tongues lolling out of their mouths, they waited at their knees. There, Elias said. That's better. Are they tame? Egwene asked faintly, and hopefully, too. They're pets? Elias snorted. Wolves don't tame, girl. Not even as well as men. They're my friends. We keep each other company. Hunt together, converse, after a fashion. Just like any friends. Isn't that right, Dapple? A wolf with fur that faded through a dozen shades of gray, dark and light, turned her head to look at him. You talk to them? Baron marveled. It isn't exactly talking, Elias replied slowly. The words don't matter, and they aren't exactly right either. Her name isn't Dapple. It's something that means the way shadows play on a forest pool at a midwinter dawn. The breeze rippling the surface.
I think I'm just right next to you. I'm in
touches the tongue. And a hint of snow
New
before
Mexico.
nightfall in the air. But that isn't quite it either. You can't say it in words. It's more of a feeling. That's the way wolves talk. The others are Burn, Hopper, and Wind. Burn had an old scar on his shoulder that might explain his name, but there was nothing about the other 2 wolves to give any indication of what their names might mean. For all the man's gruffness, Baron thought Elias had a chance to talk to him. He seemed eager enough to do it, at least. Baron eyed the wolves in the firelight and thought it might be a good idea to keep them talking. How did you learn to talk to wolves, Elias?
How many hours?
They found out, Elias replied.
Tell you the truth,
I didn't. Not at
I'm not
first.
really sure.
That's always the way that I understand. The wolves find you, not you them. Some people thought me touched by the Dark One, because wolves started appearing wherever I went. I suppose I thought so too, sometimes. Most decent folk began to avoid me. And the ones who sought me out were the kind I wanted to know one way or another. Then I noticed there were times when the wolves seemed to know what I was thinking, to respond to what was in my head. That was the real beginning. They were curious about me. Wolves can sense people usually, but not like this. They were glad to find me. They say it's been a long time since they hunted with men. And when they say a long time, the feeling I get is like a cold wind howling all the way down from the first day. I never heard of men hunting with wolves, Gwen said. Her voice was not entirely steady, but the fact that the wolves were just lying there seemed to give her heart. If Elias heard her, he gave no sign. Wolves remember
Because,
things
let's see,
differently from the way people do.
because I'm in Carlsbad.
His strange eyes took on a faraway look, as if he were drifting off on the flow of memory himself.
I think White
Every
Sands
wolf
from
remembers
here.
the history of all wolves, or at least the shape of it. Like I said,
I'm not
we
sure how
can't
far
record
White
the
Sands
words
is from
very
here.
well. They remember running down prey side by side with men. But it was so long ago that it's more like the shadow of a shadow than a memory. That's very interesting, Gwen said, and Elias looked at her sharply. No, I mean it. It is. She wet her lips. Could you teach us to talk to them? Elias snorted again. It can't be taught. Some can do it, some can't. You say he can. He pointed at Perrin. Perrin looked at Elias's finger as if it were a knife. He really is a madman. The wolves were staring at him again. He shifted uncomfortably. You say you're going to Camelin, Elias said. But that still doesn't explain what you're doing out here, days from anywhere. He tossed back his fur-patched cloak and lay down on his side, propped on one elbow and waiting expectantly. Perrin glanced at Egwene. Early on, they concocted a story for when they found people to explain where they were going without bringing them any trouble, without letting anyone know where they were really from or where they were really going, eventually. Who knew what careless word might reach a phase here? They had worked on it every day, patching it together, honing out flaws. And they had decided Egwene was the one to tell it. She was better with words than he was, and she claimed she could always tell when he was lying by his face. Egwene began at once, smoothly. They were from the north, from Saldaea, from farms outside a tiny village. Neither of them had been more than 20 miles from home in their whole lives before this. But they had heard gleemen's stories and merchants' tales. They wanted to
Scoot
see
yourself a
some
little
world.
bit.
Camelin and Ilion, the Sea of Storms, and maybe even the fabled islands of the Seafolk. Perrin listened with satisfaction. Not even Tom Maryland could have made a better tale from the little they knew of the world outside the two rivers, or one better suited to their needs. From Saldaea, eh? Elias said when she was done. Perrin nodded. That's right. We thought about seeing Moradon first. I'd surely like to see the king. But the capital city would be the first place our fathers would look. That was his part of it, to make it plain they had never been to Moradon. That way no one would expect them to know anything about the city, just in case they ran into someone who really had been there. It was all a long way from Emond's Field and the events of Winter Night. Nobody hearing the tale would have any reason to think of Tar Valon or Aes Sedai. Quite a story, Elias nodded. Yes, quite a story. There's a few things wrong with it, but the main thing is, Dapple says it's all a lump of lies. Every last word. Lies? Egwene exclaimed. Why would we lie? The four wolves had not moved, but they no longer seemed to be just lying there around the fire. They crouched instead, and their yellow eyes watched the Emmonsfielders without blinking. Perrin did not say anything, but his hand strayed to the axe at his waist. The four wolves rose to their feet in one quick movement, and his hand froze. They made no sound, but the thick hackles on their necks stood erect. One of the wolves back under the trees raised a growling howl into the night. Others answered. 5, 10, 20, till the darkness rippled with them. Abruptly, they too were still. Cold sweat trickled down Perrin's face. If you think... Egwene stopped to swallow. Despite the chill in the air, there was sweat on her face, too. If you think we're lying, then you'll probably prefer that we make our own camp for the night away from yours. Ordinarily, I would, girl. But right now, I want to know about the Trollocs and the Half-Men. Perrin struggled to keep his face impassive and hoped he was doing better at it than Egwene. Elias went on in a conversational tone. Dapple says she smelled Half-Men and Trollocs in your minds while you were telling that fool story. They all did. You're mixed up with Trollocs somehow, and the eyeless. Wolves hate Trollocs and Half-Men worse than wildfire, worse than anything. So do I. Byrne wants to be done with you.
That was an empty bowl, too.
Mark when he was a yearling. He says game is scarce and you're fatter than any deer he's seen in months. And we should be done with you. But Byrne is always impatient. Why don't you tell me about it? I hope you're not dark, friend. I don't like killing people after I've fed them. Just remember, they'll know if you lie. And even Dapple is already near as upset as Byrne. His eyes, as yellow as the wolf's eyes, blinked no more than theirs did. They are a wolf's eyes, Perrin thought. Egwene was looking at him, he realized, waiting for him to decide what they should do. Light. Suddenly I'm the leader again. Had decided from the first that they could not risk telling the real story to anyone. But he saw no chance for them to get away, even if he managed to get his axe out before... Dapple growled deep in her throat, and the sound was taken up by the other three around the fire, then by the wolves in the darkness. The menacing rumble filled the night. All right, Perrin said quickly. All right. The growling cut off, sharp and sudden. Egwene unclenched her hands and nodded. It all started a few days before winter night, Perrin began, when our friend Matt saw a man in a black cloak. Elias never changed his expression or the way he lay on his side, but there was something about the tilt of his head that spoke of ears pricking up. Before Wolves sat down, as Perrin went on, he had the impression they were listening too. The story was a long one, and he told almost all of it. The dream he and the others had had in Bear Londo, he kept to himself. He waited for the wolves to make some sign that they had caught the omission, but they only watched. Dapple seemed friendly, Byrne angry. He was hoarse by the time he finished. And if she doesn't find us in Caemlyn, we'll go on to Tar Valon. We don't have any choice except to get help from the Aes Sedai. Trollocs and Half-Men this far south, Elias mused. Now that's something to consider. He rooted behind him and tossed Perrin a hide water bag, not really looking at him. He appeared to be thinking. Until Perrin had drunk and replaced the plug before he spoke again. I don't hold with Aes Sedai. The Red Aja, those that like hunting for men who mess with the One Power, they wanted to gentle me once. I told them to their faces they were Black Aja. Serve the Dark One, I said. And they didn't like that at all. They couldn't catch me, though, once I got into the forest. But they did try. Yes, they did. Come to that, I doubt any Aes Sedai would take kindly to me after that. I had to kill a couple of warders. Bad business, that, killing warders. Don't like it. This talking to wolves, Perrin said uneasily. It has to do with the power? Of course not, Elias growled. Wouldn't have worked on me, gentling, but it made me mad, them wanting to try. This is an old thing, boy. Older than Aes Sedai. Older than anybody using the One Power. Old as humankind. Old as wolves. They don't like that either, Aes Sedai. Old things coming again. I'm not the only one. There are other things, other folk. Makes Aes Sedai nervous. Makes them mutter about ancient barriers weakening. Things are breaking apart, they say. They're afraid the Dark One will get loose, is what. You'd think I was to blame the way some of them looked at me. Red Aja, anyway. But some others, too. The Amelin seat. Yeah, I keep clear of them mostly. And clear of friends of Aes Sedai as well. You will too, if you're smart. I'd like nothing better than to stay away from Aes Sedai, Perrin said. Egwene gave him a sharp look. He hoped she would not burst out that she wanted to be an Aes Sedai. But she said nothing, though her mouth tightened and Perrin went on. It isn't as if we have a choice. We've had Trollocs chasing us, and Fades, and Drakkar. Everything but dark friends. We can't hide, and we can't fight back alone. So who is going to help us? Who else is strong enough, except Aes Sedai? Elias was silent for a time, looking at the wolves, most often at Dapple or Burn. Perrin shifted nervously and tried not to watch. When he watched, he had the feeling that he could almost hear what Elias and the wolves were saying to one another. Even if it had nothing to do with the power, he wanted no part of it. He had to be making some crazy joke. I can't talk to wolves. One of the wolves, Hopper, he thought, looked at him and seemed to grin. He wondered how he had put a name to him. You could stay with me, Elias said finally. With us. Egwene's eyebrows shot up and Perrin's mouth dropped open. Well, what could be safer? Elias challenged. Trollocs will take any chance they get to kill a wolf by itself, but they go miles out of their way to avoid it. And you won't have to worry about Aes Sedai either. They don't often come into these woods. I don't know. Perrin avoided looking at the wolves to either side of him. One was Dapple, and he could feel her eyes on him. For one thing, it isn't just the Trollocs. Elias chuckled coldly. I've seen a pack pull down one of the Eyeless, too. Lost half the pack, but they wouldn't give up once they had it sent. Trollocs, Myrddraal, it's all one to the wolves. It's you they really want, boy. They've heard of other men who can talk to wolves, but you're the first they've ever met besides me. They'll accept your friend, too, though.
No, it's just a little rough because it's throat sweet.
There's dark friends in cities. Listen, Perrin said urgently. I wish you'd stop saying that. I can't do that. What you do, what you're saying. As you wish, boy. Play the goat if you've a mind to. Don't you want to be safe? I am not deceiving myself. There's nothing to deceive myself about. All we are going to Caemlyn, Egwene spoke up firmly, and then to Tar Valon. Closing his mouth, Perrin met her angry look with one of his own. He knew that she followed his lead when she wanted to, and not when she did not. But she could at least let him answer for himself. What about you, Perrin? He said, and answered himself. Me? Well, let me think. Yes, I think I'll go on. He turned a mild smile on her. Well, Egwene, that makes both of us. I guess I'm going with you at that. Good to talk these things out before making a decision, isn't it? She blushed, but the set of her jaw never lessened. Elias grunted. Dapple said that's what you'd decide. She said the girl's planted firmly in the human world, while you, he nodded to Perrin, stand halfway between. Under the circumstances, I suppose we'd better go south with you. Otherwise, you'll probably starve to death or get lost or... Abruptly, Burn stood up, and Elias turned his head to regard the big wolf. After a moment, Dapple rose too. She moved closer to Elias so that she also was meeting Burn's stare. The tableau was frozen for long minutes. Then Burn whirled and vanished into the night. Dapple shook herself, then resumed her place, flopping down as if nothing had happened. Elias met Perrin's questioning eyes. Dapple runs this pack, he explained. Some of the males could best her if they challenged, but she's smarter than any of them. And they all know it. She saved the pack more than once. But Burn thinks the pack is wasting time with you three. Hating Trollocs is about all there is to him. If there are Trollocs this far south, he wants to be off killing them. We quite understand, Egwene said, sounding relieved. We really can find our own way. With some directions, of course, if you'll give them. Elias waved a hand. I said Dapple leads this pack, didn't I? In the morning, I'll start south with you, and so will they. Egwene looked as if that was not the best news she could have heard. Baron sat wrapped.
Oh yeah, MJ, no problem.
He could feel
I'm not worried about it. I'm pretty sure my brother's not worried about it either.
A dozen others, all young males, loped after him. He wanted to.
We do what we can to help people out when they need it, because we've been in a situation where we need help and we're being helped out, so we might as well pass it forward.
Clear, as if it were his own thought. Hatred. Hatred and the taste of blood. Chapter 24. Flight down the Arnell. Water dripped in the distance, hollow splashes echoing and re-echoing, losing their source forever. There were stone bridges and railless ramps everywhere, all sprouting off from broad, flat-topped stone spires, all polished and smooth and streaked with red and gold. Level on level, the maze stretched up and down through the murk, without any apparent beginning or end. Every bridge led to a spire, every ramp to another spire, other bridges. Whatever direction Rand looked, as far as his eye could make out in the dimness, it was the same, above as well as below. There was not enough light to see clearly, and he was almost glad of it. Some of those ramps led to platforms that had to be directly above the ones below. He could not see the base of any of them. He pressed, seeking freedom, knowing it was an illusion. Everything was illusion. He knew the illusion. He had followed it too many times not to know. However far he went, up or down, or in any direction, there was only the shiny stone. Stone. But the dankness of deep, fresh-turned earth permeated the air, and the sickly sweetness of decay. The smell of a grave opened out of its time. He tried not to breathe, but the smell filled his nostrils. It clung to his skin like oil. A flicker of motion caught his eye, and he froze where he was, half crouched against the polished guard wall around one of the spire tops.
Hell yeah, MJ.
From 1,000 places,
I would definitely have the area in the room.
Filled the air, but there were no deeper shadows.
Grow some vegetables.
The light did not come from lamps or lanterns or torches. It was simply there, such as it was, as if it seeped out of the air. Enough by which to see, after a fashion. Enough by which to be seen. But stillness.
And not only the crazy shit's gotten expensive at the grocery stores.
Now it was clear. A man striding up a distant ramp.
He paid a lot more for a lot less than what you used to get.
The man's cloak rippled with his stately haste, and his head turned, searching. The distance was too far for Rand to see more than the shape in the murk, but he did not need to be closer to know the cloak was the red of fresh blood, that the searching eyes blazed like two furnaces. He tried tracing the maze with his eyes to see how many connections Baalzamon needed before reaching him, then gave it up as useless. Distances were deceiving here, another lesson he had learned. What seemed far away might be reached by turning a corner. What appeared close could be out of reach altogether. The only thing to do, as it had been from the beginning, was to keep moving. Keep moving and not think. Thinking was dangerous, he knew. Yet, as he turned away from Baalzamon's distant form, he could not help wondering about Matt. Was Matt somewhere in this maze? Or are there two mazes, two Baalzamons? His mind skittered away from Matt. It was too dreadful to dwell on. Is this like Baerlon? Then why can't he find me? That was a little better. A small comfort. Comfort? Blood and ashes, where's the comfort in it? There had been 2 or 3 close brushes. I could not remember them clearly, but for a long, long time. How long? He had run while Baalzamon vainly pursued. Was this like Baerlon? Or was it only a nightmare, only a dream like other men's dreams? For an instant then, just for the length of time it took to take a breath, he knew why it was dangerous to think, what it was dangerous to think about. As it had before, every time he allowed himself to think of what surrounded him as a dream, the air shimmered, clouding his eyes. It turned to gel, holding him, just for an instant. The gritty heat prickled his skin, and his throat had long since gone dry as he trotted down the thorn hedge maze. How long had it been now? His sweat evaporated before it had a chance to bead, and his eyes burned. Overhead, and not too far overhead at that, boiled furious, steely clouds streaked with black, but not a breath of air stirred in the maze. For a moment he thought it had been different, but the thought evaporated in the heat. He had been here a long time. It was dangerous to think, he knew that. Smooth stones, pale and rounded, made a sketchy pavement, half buried in the bone-dry dust that rose in puffs at even his lightest step. It tickled his nose, threatening a sneeze that might give him away. When he tried to breathe through his mouth, dust clogged his throat until he choked. This was a dangerous place. He knew that too. Ahead of him, he could see 3 openings in the high wall of thorns. Then the way curved out of sight. Baalzamon could be approaching any one of those corners at that very moment. There had been 2 close encounters already, though he could not remember much beyond that they had happened and that he had escaped. Somehow. Dangerous to think too much. Panting in the heat, he stopped to examine the maze wall. Thickly woven thorn bushes, brown and dead-looking, with cruel black thorns like inch-long hooks. Too tall to see over, too dense to see through. Gingerly he touched the wall and gasped. Despite all his care, a thorn pierced his finger, burning like a hot needle. He stumbled back, his heels catching on the stones, shaking his head and scattering thick drops of blood. The burn began to subside, but his whole hand throbbed. Abruptly, he forgot the pain. His heel had overturned one of the smooth stones, kicked it out of the dry ground. He stared at it, and empty eye sockets stared back. A skull. A human skull. He looked along the pathway at all the smooth, pale stones, all exactly alike. He shifted his feet hastily, but he could not move without walking on them, and he could not stay still without standing on them. A stray thought took vague shape that things might not be what they seemed, but he pushed it down ruthlessly. Thinking was dangerous here. He took a shaky hold on himself. Staying in one place was dangerous too. That was one of the things he knew dimly, but with certainty. The flow of blood from his finger had dwindled to a slow drip, and the throb was almost gone. Sucking his fingertip, he started down the path in the direction he happened to be facing. One way was as good as another in here. Now you remembered hearing once that you could get out of a maze by always turning in the same direction. At the first opening in the wall of thorns, he turned right, then right again at the next, and found himself face to face with Baalzamon. Surprise flitted across Baalzamon's face, and his blood-red cloak settled as he stopped short.
All right, running bear.
Sword in his eyes, but in the heat of the maze, Rand barely felt them. How long do you think you can evade me, boy? How long do you think you can evade your fate? You are mine.
That shit sucks about places and finding empty shelves.
Light, help me, he muttered. Light, help me. He could not remember what.
Always got to be empty shelf somewhere.
The light will not help you.
Or just one whole empty section.
The eye of the world will not serve you. You are my hound, and if you will not course at my command, I will strangle you with the corpse of the great serpent. Baalzamon stretched out his hand, and suddenly Rand knew a way to escape. A misty, half-formed memory that screamed danger, but nothing to the danger of being touched by the Dark One. A dream, Rand shouted. This is a dream. Baalzamon's eyes began to widen, in surprise or anger or both. Then the air shimmered and his features blurred and faded. Rand turned about in one spot, staring at his own image thrown back at him 1,000-fold, 10,000-fold. Above was blackness and blackness below, but all around him stood mirrors. Mirrors set at every angle. Mirrors as far as he could see, all showing him crouched and turned, staring wide-eyed and frightened.
But farmers are probably still getting screwed over.
He spun, trying to catch it, but in every mirror it drifted behind his own image and vanished. Then it was back again, but not as a blur. Baalzamon strode across the mirrors, 10,000 Baalsamans, searching, crossing and recrossing the silvery mirrors. He found himself staring at the reflection of his own face, pale and shivering in the knife-edge cold. Baalsaman's image grew behind his, staring at him. Not seeing, but staring still. In every mirror, the flames of Baalsaman's face raged behind him, enveloping, consuming, merging. He wanted to scream, but his throat was frozen. There was only one face in those endless mirrors. His own face. Baalsaman's face. One face. Rand jerked and opened his eyes. Darkness lessened only slightly by a pale light. Barely breathing, he moved nothing except his eyes. A rough wool blanket covered him to his shoulders, and his head was cradled on his arms. He could feel smooth wooden planks beneath his hands.
Definitely
rigging creaked in the night.
gross shit that you can sustain yourself with.
He was on the spray. It was
And if you have chickens, and it's just for yourself, you really don't need that many.
Without thinking, he put his
Because my mom and that had,
at the taste of blood,
I think, like 6 or 9 chickens.
Close to his face,
And every day
where he could
was
see in the dim moonlight.
like
Where he
a
could watch
dozen or
the
more
blood
eggs
form on his
a
fingertips.
day most of the time. So,
Blood.
hey, you have plenty of eggs with that little bit of chickens, and
The spray made haste
grow your own
slowly
vegetables,
down
your own
the
wheat.
The wind came strong, but from directions that made the sails useless. With all Captain Doman's demand for speed, the vessel crept along. By night, a man in the bows cast a tallowed lead by lantern light, calling back the depth to the steersman, while the current carried her downriver against the wind.
Yeah, especially the definitely awesome.
There were no rocks to fear in the Arenal.
We used to have,
And shoals there were aplenty.
yeah, a shitload of eggs at one time in our fridge because our mom and that had chickens, but it got too hard on my aunt to keep up with them every day, so she ended up getting rid of them.
By day, the sweeps worked from sunrise to sunset, but the wind fought them as if it wanted to push the boat back upriver. They did not put into shore,
Nice,
neither by
day.
day nor by night. Bale Doman drove boat and crew alike hard.
Because if me and my brother had a room, I would probably go
He blistered
some
the crew
chilies,
for sluggards at the oars and flayed them with his tongue for every missile
potatoes.
line. His low, hard voice painting Trollocs 10 feet
Trying to think
tall
what
among
else.
them on the deck, ripping out their throats. For
Probably
2 days, that
carrots,
was enough to send every man leaping.
cucumbers.
Then the shock of the Trolloc attack began to fade. Men began to mutter about an hour to stretch their legs ashore and about the dangers of running downriver in the dark. The crew kept their grumbles quiet, watching out of the corners of their eyes to make sure Captain Doman was not close enough to hear. But he seemed to hear everything said on his boat. Each time the grumblings began, he silently brought out the long, scythe-like sword and cruelly hooked axe that had been found on the deck after the attack. He would
Oh,
hang
shit,
them
that's
on the
crazy,
mast for
MJ.
an hour.
Yeah, them roosters are some mean little bastards.
The mutterings quiet.
They'll attack.
For a day or so at least, until one or another of the crew began thinking once more that surely they had left the Trollocs
And
far behind by now.
If you're not careful when they attack, they'll split you open. They got that little spur on them.
Tom Maryland stayed clear of the crew, and they began whispering
That's the
together.
little spur that when they used to
So
do
usually he was slapping back
rooster
some
fights
telling
is where they would
jokes and
attach
exchanging banter in a way that put a
the
grin on
blade
even
to
the hardest working man. Tom watched those
well, curved that
mutters
way.
with a wary
That
eye,
way they could
while appearing to be
slash
absorbed
each
in
other.
lighting his long-stemmed pipe or tuning his harp, or almost anything except paying any mind at all to the crew.
Ooh, right?
Rand did not understand why. It was not
That's
the
why
three
he,
who came aboard chased by Trollocs whom the crew seemed to blame, but rather
Oh, shit.
Floor and Gelb.
Yeah,
For the
that's
first
that's
day or
pretty
two,
bad when the
Gelb
dogs don't
Myers
want anything to do with
could
them.
almost always be found
Yeah, that's
addressing
probably
any
why he was
woman
mad
with
at you all the
plumber,
time because you kept
telling
taking
his
the eggs. So
version of
every
the
time he
night
saw
when the
you,
others came on board.
he came gunning for
Gelb's
you.
manner slid from bluster to whines and back again, and his lip always curled when he pointed to Tom or Matt, or especially
Oh,
Matt,
I will.
trying to lay the blame on them. They're strangers, Gelb pleaded, quietly and with an eye out for the captain. What do we know of them? The Trollocs came with them. That's what we know. They're in league. Fortune, Gelb, stow it, growled a man with his hair in a pigtail and a small blue star tattooed on his cheek. He did not look at Gelb as he coiled the line on deck, working it in with his bare toes. All the sailors went barefoot despite the cold. Boots could slip on a wet deck. You'd call your mother, dark friend, if it had let you slack. Get away from me. He spat on Gelb's foot and went back to the line. All the crew remembered the watch Gelb had.
All right, everyone, probably call into this live right now. It's almost 3 o'clock.
No one even wanted to work.
I want to thank everyone for stopping by and chilling with me, and everyone that keeps coming back. Appreciate all y'all's support. Till next time, everyone. Have a good New Year's and be safe out there.
Soon he stopped talking.